London, at the twilight of the 19th century. A city of empire, teeming with unprecedented wealth and power, yet shadowed by profound poverty and social unrest. A city of rigid convention, where propriety was paramount, yet beneath the surface, currents of artistic, intellectual and sexual rebellion simmered. It was an age of immense confidence and deep anxiety, of scientific progress and spiritual doubt. And at the very center of its glittering, often treacherous social and artistic vortex stood a figure as brilliant, as complex, and as profoundly contradictory as the age itself: Oscar Wilde. Poet, playwright, novelist, critic, essayist, editor, and above all, conversationalist extraordinaire. A wit whose dazzling epigrams became the currency of London society. He was the self-proclaimed apostle of aestheticism, a man who declared he had nothing to declare but his genius, who insisted that life itself should imitate art, not the other way around. He scaled the dizzying heights of fame, fortune, and influence, only to plunge, with shocking speed, into the abyss of public disgrace, imprisonment, and exile. His name, once synonymous with brilliance and style, became inextricably linked with scandal, immorality, and the love that, in his era, dared not speak its name. But the story of Oscar Wilde, the figure who would become the quintessential London sophisticate, begins not in the imperial capital, but across the Irish Sea, in the vibrant, complex city of Dublin. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde was born here on October 16, 1854, at 21 Westland Row. He entered a family already marked by extraordinary achievement, formidable intellect, deep connections to Irish culture, and a distinct, almost defiant air of unconventionality. His father, Sir William Wilde, was a figure of formidable energy and sprawling intellect, a true Renaissance man of Victorian Dublin. Ireland's leading ear and eye surgeon, his pioneering techniques, particularly in cataract operations and treatment for deafness, brought him international renown and a knighthood in 1864. But his restless mind refused confinement to medicine. He was a passionate archaeologist, meticulously documenting Ireland's ancient sites. A dedicated statistician whose work included invaluable data on the devastating Great Famine. A respected folklorist who collected the vanishing stories and traditions of the Irish countryside, often during family holidays to the west. And a notable author, penning works on subjects ranging from Irish popular superstitions to a biography of the satirist Jonathan Swift. He was a man of immense public accomplishment, a pillar of Dublin's professional class, yet also a figure shadowed by rumours of extramarital affairs and a damaging, highly publicised lawsuit brought against him by a female patient, Mary Travers, alleging seduction under chloroform. A scandal that, while ultimately dismissed in a complex verdict, tarnished his reputation and hinted at a less disciplined private life. Wilde's mother, Jane Francesca L.J., was equally, if differently, remarkable. A woman of imposing height and dramatic presence, she commanded attention. Writing under the evocative pen name Speranza, Italian for hope, she first gained fame as a fervent Irish nationalist poet during the Young Ireland movement of the 1840s. Her revolutionary verses appearing in The Nation newspaper, calling for rebellion against British rule. Later she became a respected translator, an essayist, and a leading authority on Celtic myths and legends, publishing collections of Irish folklore. Fluent in several languages, she presided over one of Dublin's most stimulating literary salons every Saturday afternoon at their home at 1 Merrion Square, where the family moved in 1855. A vital gathering place for the city's artistic and intellectual elite. Poets, writers, academics, politicians, actors all flocked to Speranza's drawing room. Oscar was the second of 3 children. His elder brother, William Charles Kingsbury Wilde, known as Willie, was born in 1852. Though clever and initially promising, Willie lacked Oscar's focus and discipline, eventually drifting into journalism and living somewhat in his brilliant younger brother's shadow. Oscar's younger sister, Isola Francesca Emily, born in 1857, was deeply adored by him. Her sudden death from a fever in February 1867 at the age of 9, while Oscar was away at school, was a profound and lasting trauma. He mourned her intensely, treasuring a lock of her hair sealed in a decorated envelope for years afterwards. This early, intimate encounter with loss arguably shaped his later preoccupation with themes of lost innocence, the fragility of beauty, and the shadow of death that haunts even the most idyllic surfaces. Themes powerfully explored in works from The Happy Prince to The Picture of Dorian Gray. From his parents, Wilde absorbed a deep, albeit complex and sometimes contradictory, sense of Irish identity. Sir William, an Irish speaker himself, instilled a love for the country's landscape and folklore, taking his sons on archaeological expeditions and holidays to his fishing lodge by Lough Corrib in County Galway, immersing them in the stories and atmosphere of the Gaelic West. Speranza, despite her English ancestry, claiming a connection to Dante through the Alighieri line, passionately embraced Irish nationalism and filled the house with talk of Celtic heroes and legends, contributing to Oscar's own grandly resonant Gaelic middle names, Fingal O'Flaherty Wills. Her somewhat theatrical persona and her connection through her mother to the Gothic novelist Charles Maturin, author of Melmoth the Wanderer, added a strain of the dramatic and the macabre to the family inheritance. Furthermore, her controversial decision, when Oscar was about 5 or 6, to have him secretly baptized into the Roman Catholic Church by a sympathetic local priest, despite the family's official Protestant Church of Ireland affiliation, spoke volumes about her complex allegiances and perhaps hinted at a lifelong spiritual curiosity she passed on to her son. In 1864, at the age of 10, Oscar Wilde left the intellectually charged, if somewhat unconventional, atmosphere of Merrion Square for the more structured and arguably more stifling environment of Portora Royal School in Enniskillen, County Fermanagh. Portora, one of the public schools established during the reign of King James I, was a bastion of the Anglo-Irish establishment and a training ground for the British Empire. It represented a significant shift from the relatively liberal and culturally Irish milieu of his home. Reports suggest that the young Wilde did not particularly relish the experience of boarding school life, with its emphasis on conformity and athletic prowess, neither of which were his natural inclinations. He was already developing a sensitivity and an intellectual precocity that set him apart. Despite any personal reservations about the school's ethos, however, his academic abilities shone through. He proved a gifted student, particularly in classics, laying the groundwork for his future scholarly achievements. He secured prizes, demonstrating an early aptitude for mastering subjects that interested him even within a system he might have found uncongenial. Having completed his studies at Portora, Wilde returned to his native Dublin in 1871, securing an entrance scholarship to Trinity College. This marked a return to a more familiar, intellectually stimulating environment, albeit one still shaped by the complex dynamics of Anglo-Irish society. At Trinity, Wilde once again immersed himself in the study of classics, finding fertile ground for his burgeoning intellect. He came under the tutelage of two influential figures: the Reverend John Pentland Mahaffy, a brilliant but somewhat controversial scholar of Greek civilization, known for his conversational prowess and social ambition, and Robert Yelverton Tyrrell, another distinguished classicist. Mahaffy in particular took an interest in the promising young student, fostering Wilde's appreciation for Hellenism and perhaps serving as an early model for the art of captivating conversation and intellectual performance. Wilde thrived academically, demonstrating a remarkable aptitude for classical languages and literature. In 1873, his efforts were rewarded with a prestigious foundation scholarship in classics, a significant achievement marking him as one of the college's brightest students. The following year, 1874, he capped his undergraduate career at Trinity by winning the Berkeley Gold Medal for Greek, the highest award offered by the college in that subject. Beyond the formal curriculum, his time at Trinity exposed him to broader intellectual currents. He read widely, developing an affinity for poets like Shelley, whose romantic idealism and rebellious spirit may have resonated with his own developing sensibilities. It was also during these years that he first encountered Edward Carson, a fellow student who, years later, would play a devastating role in Wilde's downfall as the prosecuting counsel in the Marquess of Queensberry's libel trial. Building on his successes at Trinity, Wilde secured a demyship, a form of scholarship, to Magdalen College, Oxford, arriving in October 1874. Oxford represented the pinnacle of English academic life, and Magdalen, with its beautiful architecture and rich history, provided an inspiring backdrop. Here, Wilde would fully immerse himself in the intellectual and aesthetic currents that would define his early career. He continued his classical studies with distinction, ultimately achieving the rare feat of a double first. First-class honours in both classical moderations, preliminary examinations, and literae humaniores, or greats. Final examinations covering classical literature, history, and philosophy. This academic triumph demonstrated his formidable intellectual capacity and mastery of the classical tradition. However, Oxford's influence on Wilde extended far beyond the formal curriculum. He fell under the sway of two towering figures of Victorian thought and aesthetics. John Ruskin, the influential art critic, social thinker, and Slade Professor of Fine Art, captivated Wilde with his lectures on art, society, and the moral responsibilities of the artist. Wilde reportedly participated in Ruskin's famous road-building experiment at Hinksey, designed to instill in students an appreciation for manual labor, though perhaps more out of curiosity than conviction. Even more profoundly influential was Walter Pater, a fellow of Brasenose College and the leading exponent of aestheticism. Pater's essays, particularly those in his 1873 collection Studies in the History of the Renaissance, with their emphasis on intense experience, the pursuit of beauty, and the famous conclusion urging readers to burn always with this hard, gem-like flame, became Wilde's philosophical touchstone. Pater's ideas provided an intellectual framework for Wilde's burgeoning belief in art for art's sake and the elevation of aesthetic experience above all else. During his Oxford years, Wilde began consciously cultivating the persona that would make him famous. He became known for his flamboyant style, decorating his college rooms with objets d'art like blue and white china, leading to the famous, possibly apocryphal, remark about finding it harder and harder every day to live up to my blue china. Peacock feathers and lilies. He sported long hair, wore unconventional attire, and honed his skills as a brilliant epigrammatic conversationalist, challenging conventional notions of masculinity and propriety. He gathered a circle of admirers and became a prominent figure in undergraduate life, already a performer commanding attention. His academic achievements culminated in June 1878, when he won the prestigious Newdigate Prize for Poetry with his composition Ravenna, a reflection on the faded glory of the Italian city. He graduated with his BA in November 1878, leaving Oxford not just with a stellar academic record, but also with a fully formed aesthetic philosophy and a carefully crafted public image, ready to make his mark on London. Armed with a double first from Oxford and a carefully cultivated aesthetic persona, Oscar Wilde arrived in London in 1879, ready to conquer the capital. Initially sharing rooms with the society portrait painter Frank Miles in Salisbury Street, off the Strand, he quickly set about establishing himself within London's artistic and social circles. His wit, charm, and provocative pronouncements on art and life made him a sought-after guest at dinner parties and salons. He became the self-appointed apostle of the aesthetic movement, championing the doctrine of art for art's sake, derived from Pater and French theorists like Théophile Gautier. He argued for the supremacy of beauty and artistic sensation, often shocking conventional Victorian sensibilities with his epigrams that seemed to prioritize style over substance, appearance over morality. His flamboyant dress, velvet jackets, knee breeches, silk stockings, often accompanied by a lily or sunflower, and his languid poses became instantly recognizable and widely discussed. This carefully constructed public image, combined with his undeniable charisma and intellectual brilliance, made him a prominent, if controversial, figure. He became a darling of society hostesses, but also a target for satire. The humorous magazine Punch frequently caricatured him, exaggerating his aesthetic postures and pronouncements. Most famously, he was widely seen as the inspiration, along with others in the aesthetic circle, for the character Reginald Bunthorne, the fleshly poet in Gilbert and Sullivan's hugely popular comic opera Patience, which premiered in April 1881. While the satire might have stung, it also significantly amplified his fame, making Oscar Wilde a household name, synonymous with the perceived excesses and absurdities of the aesthetic movement. Seeking to solidify his literary reputation beyond social celebrity and caricature, Wilde gathered his verses written over the previous years and, in 1881, published his first collection, simply titled Poems. He financed the publication himself, demonstrating his determination to be recognized as a serious artist. The poems showed clear influences from his Romantic and pre-Raphaelite predecessors, Keats, Swinburne, Rossetti, and explored familiar aesthetic themes of beauty, art, and classical antiquity. The reception was mixed. Some critics praised the technical skill and lyrical quality, while others dismissed the work as derivative or overly sensuous. Nonetheless, the publication marked an important step, establishing Wilde as a published poet and adding another dimension to his rapidly growing public profile. Wilde's burgeoning fame, amplified by the success and satire surrounding the aesthetic movement, soon presented a unique opportunity. Richard D'Oyley Carte, the enterprising producer of Gilbert and Sullivan's operas, saw a chance to promote the American tour of Patience. He reasoned that sending the opera's supposed real-life inspiration, Oscar Wilde himself, on a lecture tour across North America would generate publicity and pique interest. Wilde, eager for wider recognition and perhaps needing the income, readily agreed. He set sail for New York in late 1881, arriving in January 1882. The tour, initially planned for a few months, stretched to nearly a full year due to its surprising popularity. Wilde traversed the continent, delivering lectures in major cities and remote towns across the United States and Canada. His primary topics included the English Renaissance, essentially a promotion of aestheticism, decorative art in America, and later his Impressions of America. He adapted his message for different audiences, sometimes emphasizing artistic principles, other times offering witty observations on American life and manners. His arrival was met with intense media attention, a mixture of fascination and ridicule. Newspapers reported extensively on his velvet suits, knee breeches, flowing locks, and languid mannerisms. The famous, though likely apocryphal, anecdote of him telling New York customs officials, "I have nothing to declare except my genius," perfectly captured the blend of arrogance and wit that defined his public image during the tour. His lectures themselves drew large crowds, though reactions varied. Some audiences were captivated by his eloquence and aesthetic ideals, while others found him pretentious or incomprehensible. He faced hecklers and critical press, but handled them with practiced nonchalance and sharp retorts, further enhancing his reputation as a master performer. Beyond the lecture halls, the tour provided Wilde with invaluable experiences. He met prominent American literary figures, including Walt Whitman in Camden, New Jersey. A meeting of mutual admiration between the elder poet of democracy and the young apostle of aestheticism. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and Louisa May Alcott, who was reportedly unimpressed. He observed American society with a keen eye, gathering material for future writings and refining his understanding of cultural differences. He lectured miners in Leadville, Colorado, visited Mormon communities in Salt Lake City, and experienced the vastness of the American landscape. While often exhausting and sometimes challenging, the North American tour was a resounding success in terms of publicity. It transformed Wilde from a London curiosity into an international celebrity, demonstrating his remarkable ability to command attention and shape public perception, even if that perception was often based on caricature as much as reality. Returning to Britain in late 1882, Wilde continued to capitalize on the fame garnered from his American tour. He embarked on a series of lectures across the United Kingdom and Ireland throughout 1883, refining his talks on aestheticism and decorative arts. He also spent a significant period in Paris early that year, immersing himself in the French literary scene he so admired. During this time, he met or renewed acquaintance with key figures of French literature, including the aging Victor Hugo, the symbolist poet Paul Verlaine, and other writers and artists associated with the decadent movement, further solidifying his connection to continental aesthetic ideas. It was upon his return to London that his personal life took a significant turn. He began courting Constance Lloyd, the daughter of a wealthy Irish barrister, Horace Lloyd, QC. Constance was intelligent, well-read, spoke several languages, and possessed a quiet beauty and seriousness that perhaps contrasted with Wilde's flamboyant public persona. After a relatively brief courtship, they became engaged. Oscar Wilde and Constance Lloyd were married on May 29, 1884, at St. James's Church, Paddington. The marriage was initially seen as a suitable match, bringing together Wilde's rising fame and Constance's respectable background and fortune. She had a modest income of her own. Following their marriage, the couple settled into a house at 16 Tite Street in Chelsea, a fashionable artistic quarter. Wilde commissioned E.W. Godwin, a progressive architect and designer associated with the aesthetic movement, to extensively remodel the house's interior in a modern artistic style, rejecting heavy Victorian clutter in favor of lighter colors, Japanese influences, and carefully chosen furnishings. The Tite Street house became a symbol of their aesthetic aspirations and a backdrop for their family life. Their first son, Cyril, was born on June 5, 1885, followed by their second son, Vivian, on November 5, 1886. For a time, Wilde seemed to embrace the role of husband and father. However, the financial demands of maintaining their lifestyle, including the expensive Tite Street house and Wilde's own penchant for fine living, necessitated a steady income. While his lectures provided some funds, he turned increasingly to journalism. He became a regular book reviewer for publications like the Pall Mall Gazette, producing insightful and often witty critiques. His most significant journalistic role came between 1887 and 1889, when he served as the editor of Woman's World magazine, previously The Ladies' World. Wilde aimed to elevate the publication beyond mere fashion and society gossip, commissioning articles on literature, art, politics, and social issues, and contributing editorial pieces himself. He successfully raised the magazine's intellectual profile, though he eventually found the editorial duties tiresome. Alongside journalism, Wilde began producing more original creative work during this period, moving beyond poetry and lectures. In 1887, he published several notable short stories, including the witty ghost story, The Canterville Ghost, and the darkly humorous Lord Arthur Savile's Crime. A major achievement came in 1888 with the publication of The Happy Prince and Other Tales, a collection of exquisitely crafted fairy tales written ostensibly for his sons, but resonating with adult themes of love, sacrifice, social inequality, and the complex relationship between inner beauty and outward appearance. These tales, including The Nightingale and the Rose and The Selfish Giant, showcased Wilde's mastery of prose, his imaginative power, and a depth of sentiment often hidden beneath his witty public facade. This period marked a transition, as Wilde moved from being primarily a lecturer and personality towards becoming a significant creative writer. The year 1890 marked the beginning of an astonishingly productive and transformative period for Oscar Wilde, a phase where his creative genius erupted, yielding the works for which he is most remembered. This fertile era began with the publication of his only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. It first appeared in the July 1890 issue of the American periodical Lippincott's Monthly Magazine. Even in this initial form, the story of a beautiful young man who remains eternally youthful while his portrait ages and reflects his moral corruption caused a sensation and provoked accusations of immorality and decadence. Wilde vigorously defended his work in letters to the press, arguing for the autonomy of art. He then revised and significantly expanded the novel, adding new chapters and a preface containing famous aphorisms on art and aesthetics. All art is quite useless, publishing it in book form in April 1891. This version, while still controversial, cemented Dorian Gray as a key text of fin de siècle literature, a haunting exploration of beauty, sin, duality, and the potentially destructive consequences of aesthetic philosophy lived without restraint. In the same year, 1891, Wilde further articulated his critical theories in Intentions, a collection of revised essays. This volume included seminal pieces like The Decay of Lying and The Critic as Artist, where he elaborated on his aesthetic philosophy with characteristic wit and paradox, arguing for the superiority of artifice over nature and the creative role of the critic. He also published the provocative essay The Soul of Man Under Socialism in the Fortnightly Review, presenting a unique, individualistic, and somewhat anarchic vision of socialism as a means to achieve personal artistic fulfillment, free from the burdens of property and altruism. His prose output continued with Lord Arthur Savile's Crime and Other Stories and a second collection of fairy tales, A House of Pomegranates, further showcasing his versatility. Perhaps most significantly, 1891 saw Wilde turn his attention decisively towards the theatre, the medium that would bring him his greatest popular success. He also wrote the one-act play Salome, a work steeped in biblical exoticism and decadent imagery, telling the story of Herodias' daughter and her fatal obsession with John the Baptist. Notably, he wrote it first in French, partly to demonstrate his mastery of the language and perhaps also aiming for a production in Paris, the heartland of the avant-garde theatre he admired. While Salome would face censorship challenges in England, it represented a bold artistic statement. Crucially, the summer of 1891 also marked a fateful personal encounter. Through the poet Lionel Johnson, Wilde was introduced to Lord Alfred Douglas, a handsome, aristocratic and aspiring young poet, then an undergraduate at Oxford. Known as Bosie to his friends, Douglas was captivated by Wilde's brilliance and fame, while Wilde was drawn to Douglas's youth, beauty, and noble lineage. This meeting initiated an intense and tumultuous relationship that would profoundly shape the course of Wilde's life and ultimately contribute to his tragic downfall. Meanwhile, Wilde's theatrical ambitions began to bear fruit spectacularly. On February 20, 1892, his first major society comedy, Lady Windermere's Fan, premiered at the St. James's Theatre under the management of George Alexander. Subtitled A Play About a Good Woman, the work cleverly combined sparkling epigrammatic wit, social satire, and elements of melodrama wrapped in a well-crafted plot involving secrets, scandal, and maternal sacrifice. It was an immediate triumph, delighting audiences and critics alike, and establishing Wilde as a major force in contemporary English theatre. He followed this success with A Woman of No Importance, which opened at the Haymarket Theatre on April 19, 1893. Again, the play blended witty dialogue and social commentary with a more serious exploration of societal hypocrisy and the plight of a fallen woman. It proved another significant hit, solidifying Wilde's position as the most talked-about playwright in London. During this period, Wilde was at the zenith of his fame and creative power, celebrated for his dazzling wit, his artistic innovations, and his mastery of the stage. While Wilde basked in the success of his society comedies, his relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas intensified throughout 1892 and 1893. Their association became increasingly public and extravagant, involving lavish dinners, stays in expensive hotels, like the Savoy, and trips together, including a visit to Algiers in early 1895. This lifestyle, funded partly by Wilde's earnings but also often by borrowing, placed financial strain on Wilde and drew considerable attention. More significantly, it fueled the rage of Douglas's father, John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquis of Queensberry. Queensberry, a notoriously pugnacious and eccentric figure, best known for lending his name to the rules of modern boxing, deeply disapproved of his son's relationship with Wilde, whom he viewed as a corrupting influence. Queensberry began a campaign of harassment against Wilde. He confronted his son, threatened Wilde, and made scenes, attempting to disrupt the opening night of Lady Windermere's Fan, and later the importance of being earnest. Wilde, often encouraged by the defiant Bosie, largely ignored or dismissed these threats, perhaps underestimating the Marquis's determination and ruthlessness. Meanwhile, Wilde's creative output continued unabated. In 1893, the French version of Salome was published, followed in 1894 by the English translation, famously illustrated by the young artist Aubrey Beardsley, whose stylized, decadent drawings perfectly complemented the play's atmosphere. Plans for a London production starring the legendary actress Sarah Bernhardt were thwarted when the Lord Chamberlain's office refused to grant a license, citing the long-standing rule against depicting biblical characters on the English stage. This censorship, while frustrating for Wilde, added to the play's notoriety. Wilde's theatrical dominance reached its absolute peak in early 1895. On January 3rd, An Ideal Husband opened at the Haymarket Theatre. This play, skillfully weaving political intrigue, blackmail, and themes of public versus private morality with Wilde's signature wit, was another resounding success. Just over a month later, on February 14, 1895, Valentine's Day, The Importance of Being Earnest, a trivial comedy for serious people, premiered at the St. James's Theatre. This dazzling farce, with its intricate plot, brilliant paradoxes, and unforgettable characters, represented the pinnacle of Wilde's comedic genius and is widely regarded as one of the greatest comedies in the English language. With 2 hit plays running concurrently in the West End, Wilde stood at the apex of his fame and popular acclaim. However, this triumph was short-lived. Only 4 days after the triumphant opening of Earnest on February 18, 1895, the Marquis of Queensberry, enraged and determined to provoke a confrontation, visited Wilde's club, the Albemarle. Finding Wilde not present, he left his calling card with the hall porter. On the back, he had scrawled the infamous misspelled message, "For Oscar Wilde, posing sodomite." When Wilde received the card some days later, this public insult, delivered in his own club, became the catalyst for the series of catastrophic legal battles that would destroy him. Upon receiving Queensberry's insulting card, Wilde was faced with a critical decision. Friends like Robert Ross and Frank Harris advised caution, suggesting he ignore the provocation or leave the country temporarily. However, urged on primarily by Lord Alfred Douglas, who harboured a deep animosity towards his father and saw an opportunity for revenge, Wilde chose confrontation. Against better judgment and the advice of more prudent friends, Wilde decided to sue the Marquis for criminal libel. On March 1, 1895, Wilde obtained a warrant for Queensberry's arrest. The trial of the Marquis of Queensberry began on April 3, 1895, at the Old Bailey. Queensberry's defence team, led by the formidable barrister Edward Carson, ironically a former Trinity College contemporary of Wilde's, entered a plea of justification. This meant they intended to prove that Queensberry's accusation, however crudely phrased, was substantially true, that Wilde had indeed engaged in homosexual practices, posing being interpreted as being. To support this, Carson and his team had gathered damaging evidence, including testimonies from several young men, male prostitutes and hotel attendants, with whom Wilde had associated, often introduced to him by Douglas. Wilde, initially confident and performing brilliantly in the witness box during his own examination, deploying his famous wit, soon found himself cornered under Carson's relentless cross-examination. Carson skillfully used Wilde's own writings, passages from Dorian Gray, poems and private letters to Douglas obtained by Queensberry, against him, suggesting they revealed immoral and unnatural inclinations. More devastatingly, Carson questioned Wilde directly about his relationships with specific young men, exposing the dangerous underworld he had frequented. Faced with mounting evidence and Carson's incisive questioning, Wilde's composure crumbled. It became clear that continuing the prosecution would only lead to further damaging revelations and likely perjury charges. On April 5th, the third day of the trial, Wilde's counsel withdrew the prosecution. Queensberry was triumphantly acquitted, and Wilde left the courtroom a ruined man. The consequences were immediate. Queensberry's acquittal effectively validated the accusations against Wilde. Evidence gathered for the libel trial was handed over to the Director of Public Prosecutions. That same afternoon, April 5, 1895, a warrant was issued for Wilde's arrest on charges of committing acts of gross indecency with other male persons under Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, the Labouchere Amendment. Despite pleas from friends to flee the country while he still could, Wilde seemed paralyzed by indecision or a sense of fatalism. He remained at the Cadogan Hotel, where he was arrested the following day, April 6th. Wilde's first criminal trial began on April 26, 1895, again at the Old Bailey. He was tried alongside Alfred Taylor, a man accused of procuring young men for him. The prosecution presented evidence from several male prostitutes detailing their encounters with Wilde. Wilde's defense attempted to discredit these witnesses and portray Wilde as a victim of blackmail. The trial generated enormous public interest and scandal. After several days of testimony and legal argument, the jury on May 1st announced they were unable to reach a verdict on the main charges against Wilde, although they convicted Taylor on some counts. Wilde was released on bail pending a retrial. A second criminal trial commenced on May 20th, 1895, before Mr. Justice Wills. This time, the prosecution focused its case more narrowly. Despite a powerful closing speech by Wilde's counsel, Sir Edward Clarke, the weight of the evidence and the prevailing moral climate were against him. On May 25, 1895, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts except those involving one specific witness, Justice Wills, denouncing Wilde's actions in harsh terms, sentenced him to the maximum penalty allowed under the Act: 2 years imprisonment with hard labour. The sentence marked the catastrophic end of Wilde's public life and glittering career. Immediately following his sentencing on May 25, 1895, Oscar Wilde began his 2 years of hard labour. He was initially incarcerated at Pentonville Prison in London, before being transferred to Wandsworth Prison, also in the capital. The prison regime of the time was deliberately harsh, designed not for rehabilitation but for punishment and deterrence. Hard labour involved physically demanding and often pointless tasks, such as picking oakum, teasing apart old tarred ropes, or walking the treadmill, a grueling device designed to inflict exhausting monotony. Prisoners endured meagre diets, solitary confinement for much of the day in cramped, poorly lit cells, enforced silence, and coarse, uncomfortable uniforms. The experience was profoundly shocking and degrading for a man accustomed to luxury, intellectual stimulation, and the adulation of society. Wilde suffered immensely, both physically and mentally. The poor food, harsh conditions, and manual labor took a toll on his health. During his time at Wandsworth, he collapsed in the prison chapel, likely due to illness and weakness, injuring his right ear in the fall. This injury would lead to recurrent infections and ultimately contribute to the meningitis that caused his death years later. the psychological impact was equally devastating. Stripped of his identity, he was referred to by his prison number, C.3.3. His reputation, his possessions, and contact with the outside world, he experienced profound despair and humiliation. While Wilde was imprisoned, the full weight of his social and financial ruin became apparent. He was declared bankrupt in November 1895. The contents of his beloved home at 16 Tite Street, filled with art, books and furniture reflecting his aesthetic taste, were publicly auctioned off at humiliatingly low prices to pay creditors. His plays were quickly removed from the London stage and his books withdrawn from sale. His name became synonymous with scandal and perversion. His wife, Constance, though initially supportive, was forced by social pressure and concern for her children's future to distance herself. She visited him in prison to break the news of his mother Speranza's death in early 1896. Later, under pressure from her advisors, she compelled Wilde to relinquish his parental rights and changed her own surname and those of their sons, Cyril and Vivian, to Holland, effectively erasing the Wilde name from their public identity. In November 1895, Wilde was transferred from Wandsworth to Reading Jail in Berkshire. Conditions initially remained harsh. However, later in his sentence, particularly after the appointment of a more humane governor, Major James Nelson, and possibly due to public concern raised by friends like Robert Sherard, his situation improved slightly. He was allowed more books and writing materials. It was during this later period, from January to March 1897, that Wilde composed his long, soul-searching letter to Lord Alfred Douglas. Written over many pages of prison paper, this extraordinary document, later titled De Profundis, From the Depths, was part accusation, part apologia, part spiritual meditation. In it, Wilde recounted their destructive relationship, reflected on his own character flaws, explored the nature of suffering and sorrow, and articulated a newfound, albeit complex, identification with Christ as a figure of romantic individualism and artistic suffering. He was not permitted to send the letter from prison. He entrusted the manuscript to Robert Ross upon his release. Oscar Wilde was released from Reading Jail on the morning of May 19, 1897, having served his full 2-year sentence with minimal remission. His release was carefully managed by loyal friends, including Moray Day and Stuart Headlam, to avoid the glare of press attention. A broken man, physically weakened and emotionally scarred by his ordeal, financially ruined, and a social pariah, he knew he could not remain in England. He was immediately escorted to the coast and boarded a ferry at New Haven, crossing the English Channel to Dieppe in Normandy, France. He arrived later that same day, stepping onto foreign soil as an exile, never to return to England alive. Seeking anonymity and perhaps embracing the symbolic weight of his suffering and wandering, Wilde adopted the pseudonym Sebastian Melmoth. Sebastian invoked the Christian martyr pierced by arrows, while Melmoth was borrowed from the tormented protagonist of Melmoth the Wanderer, the Gothic novel by his great-uncle Charles Maturin. Under this name, he attempted to build a new, quieter life. He spent the summer and autumn of 1897 in the seaside village of Berneval-sur-Mer near Dieppe. Here, he made a valiant effort to resume writing, focusing his energy on a long poem inspired by the execution of a fellow inmate he had witnessed at Reading, Charles Thomas Wooldridge. This work would become The Ballad of Reading Jail. However, the pull of his past proved difficult to resist. Despite the strenuous objections of friends like Robert Ross and the explicit conditions set by his estranged wife Constance regarding his allowance, Wilde agreed to a reunion with Lord Alfred Douglas. They met secretly in Rouen in August 1897 and subsequently travelled together to Naples, Italy, where they rented the Villa Giudice and attempted to rekindle their relationship. The reunion, however, was ill-fated. It quickly fell into old patterns of extravagance. Wilde spent the advance he received for the ballad, recrimination, and instability. News of their cohabitation reached Constance and her advisors, who promptly cut off Wilde's small allowance, plunging him into severe financial hardship. The reunion lasted only a few months before ending in acrimony in late 1897. It confirmed the destructive nature of their bond and alienated many who had been trying to support Wilde's rehabilitation. Despite this personal turmoil, Wilde completed his final major work. The Ballad of Reading Gaol was published in February 1898 by the publisher Leonard Smithers, initially under Wilde's prison number C.3.3. The poem, a stark and moving account of prison life, empathy for a condemned man, and critique of the penal system, was an unexpected success, both critically and commercially, running through several editions. Its directness, emotional power, and ballad form marked a significant departure from his earlier aesthetic style. Following the publication of The Ballad and the Death of Constance in Genoa in April 1898, after complications from spinal surgery, Wilde's life entered its final phase. He drifted between France and Italy, occasionally visiting Switzerland. He was largely dependent on the charity of a few loyal friends, including Ross, who managed his literary affairs, Reggie Turner, Frank Harris, and Maura Day. He spent considerable time in Paris, frequenting cafes, holding court when funds allowed, but often living in cheap hotels and struggling with poverty and declining health. Though he talked of new writing projects, his creative drive seemed largely extinguished by his experiences. His final years were marked by a sense of displacement, loneliness, and the inescapable shadow of his past. By the autumn of 1900, Oscar Wilde's health, precarious for some time, took a final decisive downturn. Living in a state of poverty in a small, shabby room at the modest Hôtel d'Alsace, now L'Hôtel, at 13 Rue des Beaux-Arts in Paris, he suffered from recurrent health problems, exacerbated by his previous imprisonment and periods of destitution. The persistent ear infection, originating from his fall in Wandsworth Prison Chapel, worsened significantly. Leading to agonizing pain, it eventually developed into cerebral meningitis, a fatal inflammation of the membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord. In his final weeks, Wilde was largely confined to his hotel room, gravely ill and often delirious. His loyal friends, Robert Ross and Reginald "Reggie" Turner, remained steadfastly by his side, providing comfort, managing his affairs as best they could, and witnessing his final decline. Despite his suffering, flashes of his old wit reportedly surfaced even near the end. Aware of the gravity of his condition, and perhaps fulfilling the lifelong spiritual curiosity noted even in his childhood, Wilde expressed a desire to be received into the Roman Catholic Church. Robert Ross summoned Father Cuthbert Dunn, an Irish Passionist priest from the nearby St. Joseph's Church on Avenue Hoche. On November 29, 1900, Father Dunn administered conditional baptism, acknowledging the possibility of his childhood Catholic baptism and the last rites. Wilde, though extremely weak and unable to speak clearly, was conscious enough to assent to the sacraments. Just one day later, on the afternoon of November 30, 1900, Oscar Wilde died in his hotel room. He was only 46 years old. His death, like much of his later life, occurred in relative obscurity and poverty. A small funeral service was held, attended by a handful of loyal friends, including Ross, Turner, Douglas, who arrived from England, and a few others. On December 3, 1900, he was buried in a modest grave in the Cimetière de Bagneux, a municipal cemetery located outside Paris. In the years immediately following his death, Wilde's name remained tarnished by scandal. However, Robert Ross, appointed as Wilde's literary executor, worked tirelessly to settle Wilde's debts, largely through royalties from his works, especially the plays which gradually returned to favor, clear his name, and ensure the publication of his remaining writings. In 1905, Ross published a significantly edited version of the prison letter to Douglas, giving it the title De Profundis. This publication offered the public a glimpse into Wilde's suffering and intellectual reflections during his imprisonment, beginning the slow process of reassessing his life and work. A more fitting final resting place was secured thanks to the efforts of Ross and the generosity of one of Wilde's admirers, Helen Carew. In 1909, Wilde's remains were exhumed from Bagneux and transferred to the prestigious Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, the burial site of many famous artists and writers. Ross commissioned the modern sculptor Jacob Epstein to create a monumental tomb. Epstein's striking design, a large stylized winged figure carved directly from Hopton wood stone, inspired by Assyrian motifs, was controversial in its time but has become an iconic landmark. The tomb was unveiled in 1914. Throughout the 20th century, Wilde's reputation underwent a dramatic transformation. From the disgraced figure of 1900, he gradually came to be recognized as one of the most important writers and cultural figures of the late Victorian era. His plays, particularly The Importance of Being Earnest, became staples of the theatrical repertoire worldwide. His novel, essays, and fairy tales were rediscovered and celebrated for their wit, style, and intellectual depth. His life story, with its dramatic rise and fall, became a subject of enduring fascination, interpreted variously as a cautionary tale, a martyrdom for artistic and sexual freedom, or a complex tragedy. The full text of De Profundis, finally published in its complete form by Rupert Hart Davis in 1962, based on the manuscript held in the British Library, further deepened understanding of his prison experience and complex personality. Today, Oscar Wilde is celebrated not only for his brilliant writing, but also as a symbol of aestheticism, individualism, and defiance against repressive social conventions. His life and work continuing to provoke thought and inspire admiration.